Welcome to the IES Basic Overview of Research Grant Programs webinar. I am Akila Swinton Nelson, a Program Officer in the National Center for Special Education Research. And joining me is Helen Kim, a Program Officer in the National Center for Education Research. Here is the agenda for today's webinar. We will introduce IES and its research grant programs and discuss how you can identify the right IES grant program for your research. We will then discuss what you need to know to apply to our research programs and discuss the application submission and review process. This webinar is intended to be an overview of our grant programs. It is not intended to be a substitute for reading the request for applications for your intended competition and the IES Grant Submission Guide. IES strongly recommends that you read the request for applications to ensure you are familiar with all the requirements and recommendations as you write your grant application. IES also recommends you read the Grant Submission Guide to ensure you are familiar with all the documents that must be submitted and the procedures for submitting your grant application. Let's get started with an introduction to IES and the research grant programs. This graphic represents the organizational structure of IES. We are led by a director who is advised by the National Board for Education Sciences. Our science office oversees the scientific peer review processes for IES grant applications and IES reports. IES has 4 centers. The National Center for Education Statistics is the primary federal entity for collecting and analyzing data related to education. The National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance conducts unbiased, large-scale evaluations of education programs supported by federal funds, provides technical assistance, and supports the development and use of research and evaluation. The National Center for Education Research, NCER, and the National Center for Special Education Research, NCSER, award research grants. The grant programs we are discussing today are managed by NCER and NCSER. The objectives of our grant programs are to develop or identify education interventions that enhance education outcomes and can be widely deployed. And by interventions, we are referring to practices, programs, policies, and approaches. Identify what does not work and thereby encourage innovation and further research. Understand the processes that underlie the effectiveness of education interventions and the variation in their effectiveness. Develop measures of academic achievement and progress, and support research and national leadership on core issues. Another way of thinking about the objectives for the research grant programs is to provide answers to 3 questions. What works to improve student education outcomes? What doesn't work? And how do interventions improve education outcomes, including for whom do they work and under what conditions? To encourage rigorous education research that is transparent, actionable, and focused on meaningful outcomes, all applications to the Education and Special Education Research Grants programs are expected to incorporate the principles outlined in the IES-wide Standards for Excellence in Education Research, or SEER, as applicable. The principles are listed on this slide and include, for example, pre-registering your studies, making research findings, methods, and data available to others, and analyzing costs. SEER codifies practices that IES expects and increasingly requires to be implemented as part of IES-funded causal impact studies. But note that many standards and associated recommendations are applicable to other types of research, and IES increasingly requires applicable standards to be followed in those studies as well. IES-funded researchers should consult grant and contract documents for more information about how SEER applies to your project. For more information about SEER, please visit our SEER website at ies.ed.gov/SEER. Collectively, IES-funded research should yield outcomes and products that are meaningful, inform stakeholders about the cost and practical benefits and effects of interventions on relevant outcomes for learners, and contribute to scientific knowledge and theory of teaching, learning, and organizing education systems. Researchers receiving funding through this program are to disseminate evidence in a way that is useful to and accessible by educators, parents, policymakers, researchers, and the public. Why would you apply to IES? You would apply to IES if you are interested in working in education settings, you are interested in improving student education outcomes, and you are committed to sharing your research findings with education practitioners. What makes us different from other funding programs within the Department of Education? Our grant funds are used to cover research, not program support or service provision. So, if you want to implement a new reading program in your school, we will not give you funds simply to get the reading program up and running. You need to have a research study to develop or examine the impact of it, etc. A good application is a good application. We don't have priorities or competitive preferences that result in extra points for applicants. Reviewers have flexibility to assign points based upon overall scientific merit. For example, other programs may assign a maximum number of points that you can obtain for your significance section. We allow reviewers flexibility to weight each section as they see fit on determining the overall scientific merit of your application. How does IES compare to other agencies? Similar to other federal funding agencies, IES supports rigorous research at all stages, including basic research, iterative research to inform research and development of new interventions or refine existing interventions, pilot studies, and larger rigorous studies to determine the efficacy or effectiveness of interventions, programs, policies, or practices. This chart lists the three major federal funders of education research: IES, the National Science Foundation, and the National Institutes of Health. IES and NIH are similar in that we have independent scientific review offices that are separate from the program offices. Because of this, we are allowed to provide technical assistance to applicants. At NSF, the program officers manage the review process, so this limits the amount of technical assistance they can give applicants since they are directly involved in the review process. IES is considered as competitive or even more competitive than other federal funding agencies. In terms of the types of things we fund, there is some overlap and certainly complementary research happening among agencies, but there are key differences. For example, NSF is more STEM focused than IES, though we both fund science, technology, engineering, and math grants. NIH, specifically the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development and the National Institute of Mental Health, supports more foundational research, such as brain-related research and genetics research, that we don't fund at IES. Results from this work, however, could certainly inform the work that we do at IES and could guide researchers in developing a grant to IES. So that was a quick overview of IES, and now we will turn to talking about our current funding opportunities. Let's move into the nuts and bolts of getting started with an IES application. First, you need to identify which competitions are open for fiscal year 2022. To identify open funding opportunities, we have a suggested set of steps to follow. If you aren't already signed up, you should sign up for the IES Newsflash. The Newsflash is an email-based alert service designed to inform you about all new content posted to the IES website, including new funding opportunities when they become available. All of our funding opportunities are announced in the Federal Register. The Federal Register is the official journal of the federal government of the United States that contains government agency rules, proposed rules, and public notices, including agency funding announcements. IES also maintains a funding opportunities page on the IES website. Once you are on the IES funding page, navigate to the Request for Applications page and review current requests for applications, which is our notice that grant funding is available. Most importantly of all, but only after you have read the relevant RFAs, contact the relevant program officer for the topic of interest in the relevant center. As you are reading through the RFAs, make sure you review the current list of research topics and any methodological requirements. If you still need help narrowing down your list of possible topics in/or RFAs, it can often help to review the abstracts of previously funded projects. IES is holding 6 separate research and research training competitions in FY 2022. We are going to describe the general focus of each of these competitions. Again, be sure to read the full request for applications for a more detailed description of each competition. It is important to note here that due to limited funds available for new FY 2022 awards, NICSR will not be able to compete our regular competitions, including our primary grant program, the Special Education Research Grants Program, as well as our other grant competitions, research training programs in special education, research using NAEP process data for learners with disabilities, and research grants focused on systematic replication in special education. NICSR released the new Research to Accelerate Pandemic Recovery in Special Education Grants Program, which is funded with money provided to us in the American Rescue Plan. So why would you read the RFAs carefully? First, the RFA is your guide to preparing high-quality applications. We provide a great amount of detail in our RFAs about the requirements you must meet, as well as recommendations for how to write a high-quality application. Second, reviewers use RFAs to evaluate your application for its scientific merit. RFAs have sections to walk you through what you need to know in including your application. The sections include the following, but may vary depending on your RFA. An overview and general requirements section, which includes a summary of changes to the RFA from the previous competition, if applicable. A section on topics. A section about project type requirements and recommendations. A section about appendices and other narrative content. A section about competition regulations and review criteria. And a compliance and responsiveness checklist. IES has developed a separate submission guide which contains important information about submission procedures and IES-specific guidance and recommendations to help you ensure your application is complete and received on time without errors through grants.gov. In this section of the presentation, we will introduce our grant programs, the topics and project types within them, key parameters for project types, and submission dates for applications to each of the programs. This year, NICSR has a new competition, 324X, Research to Accelerate Pandemic Recovery in Special Education. The purpose of this program is to support research designed to speed up post-pandemic learning gains for students with or at risk for disabilities. In this request for applications, IES invites applications to conduct research focused on addressing a pandemic-related problem or issue of importance to a state or local education agency or school. The proposed research should yield information in our products that are timely and of direct use to districts and states. Research supported under this program will be funded by the American Rescue Plan. Because this is a new competition, I would like to highlight some of the unique or key features of this program. First, The research must directly address a pandemic-related problem or issue that affects learners with or at risk for disabilities and is important to education agencies. Second, research activities should have the potential to significantly and rapidly improve student outcomes. Third, you must demonstrate buy-in and involvement from education agencies. And fourth, research should yield information and or products that are timely and of direct use to education agencies. The intent of this program is to provide research-based evidence to education agencies as quickly as possible, so IES will not support lengthy projects to develop or adapt interventions. For more detailed information about 324X, please follow the link to view the on-demand webinar about this competition. Applications must conform to the following limits on award duration and cost. Budgets should align with proposed project activities. Although a maximum cost is specified, IES expects that costs will vary depending on the type of research proposed. Estimated ranges are provided to reflect the variety of research questions and designs that may be proposed under these broad types of research. In other words, you don't need to request a maximum duration and maximum budget. Your request should be aligned with the research that's needed to address the pandemic-related problem identified. Here is a table of important dates. You'll notice that there are two application deadlines. The first is August 2nd and the second is September 9th. The possible start dates are different for each. If you apply to the first deadline, your start date can be as early as January 1st, 2022 or as late as March 1st, 2022. If you apply to the second deadline, the start dates are the same as our typical competitions and can be anywhere from July 1st to September 1st, 2022. Letters of intent were due June 30th for the first application deadline and July 15th for the second deadline. If you miss the letter of intent due date, do not fret, you can still apply. However, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to one of the NICSR program officers to let us know your plan to apply and to discuss your research idea. There will also be two virtual office hour sessions related to this competition. The first was on July 6th and the second is on July 30th at 1 p.m. This will be a time for you to ask questions and hear others' questions about this program.
This is Helen Kim. As Akila mentioned earlier, I am a program officer at the National Center for Education Research, or NCER, and I will now be discussing NCER's funding opportunities. Our primary grant program is 84.305A. These are our education research grants. We recommend that all applicants familiarize yourselves with the requirements and recommendations of 305A, even if you intend to apply to another program. With the ARFAs, you will need to apply under a topic and project type combination. Since NICSR's primary grant program, Special Education Research Grants 84.324A, will not be competed in FY22, we will only provide a high-level summary of the topics and project types we are competing in fiscal year 2022 for 84.305A over the next few slides. NCER uses a topic structure to encourage focused programs of research and to provide opportunities for applicants to consult with program officers who oversee each topic while preparing their applications. Your application must be directed to one of the topics. The topics are intentionally broad to encourage a wide range of innovative ideas and research questions. NCER's Education Research Grant Program includes 11 topics. The RFA for the Education Research Grant Program provides a discussion of the purpose and needed research under each topic. IES encourages focused research along a continuum of research, development, and evaluation activities necessary for building a scientific research enterprise. For all applications, in addition to identifying a research topic, you must also identify your project type. The 4 project types being competed in FY 2022 are measurement, exploration, development and innovation, and initial efficacy and follow-up. Measurement supports both the development and validation of new or modified instruments for use by educators or education researchers. Some measurement projects will result in instruments that have been validated for use with specific populations in specific contexts to support education practice and policy. Other measurement projects will result in instruments for use by education researchers. Both types of instruments are needed to ensure that high-quality measurement tools are available to support rigorous exploratory development and efficacy research. Exploration supports projects that identify relationships between learner, educator, school, and policy-level characteristics and meaningful education outcomes. Findings from exploration projects point out potentially fruitful areas for further investigation from researchers, policymakers, and practitioners, rather than providing strong evidence for adopting specific interventions or measurement tools. Exploration projects should inform future work to determine what works, for whom, and under what conditions. Development and innovation projects focus on the development and pilot testing of new or modified education interventions that are intended to produce beneficial impacts on learner outcomes. Successful development and innovation projects will result in a fully developed version of the intervention with clear specifications of core components and all procedures and materials, including fidelity measures and evidence of usability and feasibility to support testing and scaling of promising results, pilot data that speak to the intervention's promise for generating meaningful outcomes, and information about the costs associated with implementing the fully developed intervention. Initial efficacy and follow-up supports initial efficacy studies of education interventions predicted to have a meaningful effect on important education outcomes using designs that meet the IES What Works Clearinghouse design standards and longer-term follow-up studies of rigorously evaluated interventions. Initial efficacy projects test interventions that have not been rigorously evaluated previously to examine the intervention's beneficial impact on education outcomes in comparison to an alternative practice, program, or policy. Follow-up projects test the longer-term impact of an intervention that has been shown to have beneficial impacts on education outcomes in a previous or ongoing evaluation study. Initial efficacy and follow-up projects should provide practical information about the benefits and costs of specific interventions to inform the intervention's theory of change, its implementation, its usefulness, and its contribution to future research. For those of you who are familiar with the IES project types, you will notice that IES is not accepting projects to carry out replication studies under the A RFAs. Rather, applicants interested in carrying out a replication study should consult the research grants focused on systematic replications program, discussed later in this webinar, for funding for replication studies. The award parameters, including the maximum duration and the maximum award, vary by project type. Please do not go beyond the maximum duration and award, as doing so may prevent your application from being reviewed. Also, refer to the RFA for other information about how the funds requested under certain project types should be allocated. This slide includes important dates for 84.305A. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than September 9th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Letters of intent are due on July 22nd, and the application package is available on grants.gov. The possible start dates for the award are between July 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2022. Under 84.305B, NCER is competing 3 research training grant programs in FY 2022. The Early Career Mentoring Program supports faculty employed by minority-serving institutions who are developing their education research careers. The awards are intended to provide support for research, including salary for protected time to conduct research, and career development that includes training under the guidance of an experienced mentor or mentors. Postdoctoral training programs support the training of fellows who have a doctoral degree and high potential for success in research, but may need more research experience and mentoring in the education sciences before launching their careers. The Methods Training Program supports training of current education researchers, including state and local education agency research staff, to expand and upgrade their methodological skills. These are the award parameters for the research training programs, including the maximum durations and the maximum award amounts. This slide includes important dates for 84.305B. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than September 9, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Letters of intent are due on July 22nd, and the application package is available on grants.gov. The possible start dates for the award are between July 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2022. The Methods Grant Program supports the development of a wide range of practical, methodological, and statistical products, including new or improved methods, toolkits, guidelines, and software to better enable applied education scientists to conduct rigorous education research. Researchers should plan to disseminate their products to applied education researchers who may use them in their own work, as well as to methods researchers who may further develop or make use of them. The Core Grants topic, previously called Regular Grants topic, supports the development of new and improved statistical and research methods and their dissemination to education researchers through such products as articles in applied education journals, working papers and monographs, software, and toolkits describing how to use them. IES established the Early Career Grants to encourage a new generation of education researchers to address methodological issues and challenges and to develop statistical and methodological products that will benefit the education sciences. Applicants to the Early Career Grants topic must have received their doctorate on or after April 1st, 2017. Early Career Grants are intended for applicants proposing high-quality work of the type discussed in the overview section, but that can be done over a shorter period and with less funding. These are the award parameters for the statistical and research methodology in education grants. For core grants, there is a maximum duration of 2 years for toolkits, guidelines, compendia, and review papers, with the maximum award amount of $350,000. There is a maximum duration of 3 years for new and improved methods with a maximum award amount of $900,000. For early career grants, there is a maximum duration of 2 years and a maximum award amount of $300,000. This slide includes important dates for 84.305D. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than August 12th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Letters of intent are due on July 8th, and the application package is posted on grants.gov. The possible start dates for the award are between March 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2022. Starting in FY 2020, IES moved replication projects out from under the primary grant programs and no longer accepts applications to conduct them through those programs. Systematic replication studies that vary one or more aspects of a previous study contribute to a better understanding of what interventions improve education outcomes and the conditions under which they will likely work and for whom. These replications will involve varying at least one aspect of a prior impact study, such as the geographical location, the population of learners, educators and/or schools, and/or the intervention implementation. Under both approaches, IES will support replication studies that evaluate an intervention when implemented under routine conditions, also known as effectiveness replications, and evaluations that provide more support than is typically provided under routine conditions, also known as efficacy replications. If you are familiar with this grant competition, please note that in FY 2022, IES will no longer specify separate approaches for systematic replications versus systematic replications using digital platforms. IES is interested in a wide range of interventions for replication, including but not limited to interventions that leverage digital platforms or other technology to improve teaching and learning. These are the award parameters for the Systematic Replication Program. For efficacy replications, the maximum duration is 5 years and the maximum award is $4 million. For effectiveness replications, the maximum duration is 5 years and the maximum award is $4.5 million. This slide includes important dates for 84.305R. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than September 9th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Letters of intent are due on July 22nd, and the application package is available on grants.gov. The possible start dates for the award are between July 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2022. In FY 2021, IES began the Using Longitudinal Data to Support State Policymaking Grant Program to expand state education agencies' use of their state longitudinal data systems, or the SLDS, to provide evidence for use when making policy decisions. For FY 2022, IES has changed the name to Using Longitudinal Data to Support State Education Recovery Policymaking, or the Using Data for Recovery Grant Program. This grant program will support state agencies' use of their state's education longitudinal systems as they and local education agencies re-engage their students after the disruptions caused by COVID-19. State agencies may use these grants to 1. Identify subpopulations of students that did not engage or progress at expected rates during and after the disruption and the reasons why, and 2. Develop evidence on the implementation and impact of programs and policies intended to help these students fully re-engage and progress in their education. State agencies may use these grants to identify what additional supports schools, staff, and students may need after the disruptions caused by COVID-19, determine whether the programs and policies that provide such supports are being well implemented, and generate evidence regarding which program and policies are linked to improvements in student education overall and for underrepresented student subgroups who are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Proposed research can address learners in pre-K, K through 12, post-secondary, and adult education. This slide includes the award parameters for the Using Data for Recovery Grant Program, including the maximum duration of 3 years and the maximum award amount of $1 million. This slide includes important dates for 84.305S. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than August 12, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Letters of intent are due on July 8th, and the application package is posted on grants.gov. The possible start dates for the award are between February 1st, 2022 and September 1st, 2022.
Now we will discuss some quick advice for you as you prepare your application and an overview of the submission and review process. Each year, there are changes made to the RFAs. The RFA will include a summary of those changes. We urge you to pay careful attention to these changes, particularly if you have applied to IES in the past and you may be resubmitting an application. You should also consider joining IES program officers for discussions and question and answer sessions during virtual office hours. You can find more information about how to attend and session topics on the Virtual Office Hours webpage. You can also review other relevant funding webinars such as the IES Grant Writing Workshop and the IES Application Process webinars. These and other webinars will be posted on the IES Funding Opportunities page. It is important to note that dissemination is a separate review criterion. Applications that do not contain a dissemination history and plan in Appendix A will not be peer-reviewed. Reviewers will consider team members' experience disseminating research findings and products from past projects to a range of audiences, in addition to applicants' plans for disseminating the findings of the proposed study. In addition, all applicants must adhere to the IES public access requirements. All awardees will be required to submit their accepted peer-reviewed manuscripts to ERIC, the Department of Education's online library, in order to ensure that the findings of federally funded research are available to the public. And applicants who are submitting certain project types, such as exploration and initial efficacy and follow-up, must include a data management plan which specifies how the data collected with federal funds will be made available at the conclusion of the study to allow independent replication of findings and or to explore other research questions. Please check the RFA to which you are applying to understand all of the public access requirements for that competition. There is an IES application process webinar, which I mentioned before, and in that webinar, IES staff will go into more detail about the application process. You need 3 things to apply. First, you need the RFA, which contains information for writing your project narrative. Second, you need the IES application submission guide, which describes information related to submitting your application and provides an overview of the funding process. Lastly, you need the application package, which can be found on grants.gov. In terms of registration for grants.gov, the first tip, and perhaps the most important, is to start this process early. Initial registration can take more than 5 business days, and even if you're already registered, the annual update that you have to complete could take more than 3 days. It's your institution that needs to register. All applications must be submitted electronically through grants.gov. Applications received by grants.gov are date and time stamped to the second. So your application must be fully uploaded and submitted by the date and time specified in the RFA. IES will not accept late applications. As I just mentioned, all applications must be submitted electronically through the grants.gov website. Grants.gov requires applicants to use the workspace interface. Grants.gov marks alerts in red, and these should be attended to, as failure to follow the Grants.gov requirements will result in an unsuccessful application.
Now let's talk about what happens once you successfully submit an application. Applications are first reviewed for compliance and responsiveness to the requirements set out in the request for applications. Applications that are compliant and responsive are assigned to a review panel. 2 to 3 panel members conduct a primary review of each application. The most competitive applications are reviewed by the full panel. As a result, applicants whose applications were triaged, which are not reviewed by the review panel, receive the review comments from the primary reviewers but no scores. Applicants whose applications go to full panel receive the review comments from the primary reviewers, the full panel's review scores, and a summary of the panel's discussion of the application. So how are funding decisions made? The following will be considered in making award decisions for responsive and compliant applications. scientific merit as determined by scientific peer review, performance and use of funds under a previous federal award, contributions to the overall program of research described in this request for applications, ability to carry out the proposed research within the maximum award and duration requirements, and the availability of funds. Office of Science staff identify and recruit highly qualified reviewers primarily on the basis of the quality of the research they have conducted and published in scientific peer-reviewed journals and the degree to which they are in-depth experts in the relevant research methods and subject matter. Applications are assigned to panel according to the match between the overall expertise of reviewers on each panel and the content and methodological approach proposed in each application. More detailed information about the peer review process can be found on our website. The Applicant Notification System, or the ANS, is housed at iesreview.ed.gov. After you receive an email notification, you may sign into the ANS to view the reviews of your application and your award status, and if your application went to full panel, the review scores and panel discussion summary. We encourage you to discuss your reviews with the program officer and consider reapplying if your application is not funded. Along with the resources described in this overview, program officers are another resource you should use, so please contact us. Email your initial research idea to a program officer. As you develop your application, program officers can comment on your content and framing of the research. For additional information, please refer to the RFAs and reach out to the program officers listed in the relevant RFA. Please feel free to reach out to one of us as well. Our emails are listed here. Best of luck to you all and happy writing.